Okay, my name's Paul Sheridan. I'm a senior ecologist with Ground Control. The reason I'm kind of bringing this webinar to you, really, I guess, is probably because my specialist interest is birds and has been for some time. This webinar basically we'll go over what the Big Garden Bird Watch is, why it's important, and we'll have a look at some of the results from last year's Big Garden Bird Watch, and then talk about some tips and advice really for bird ID. And there is a little bit of a quiz in the middle, so for all you, I know there's a few birders out there who might want to have a go at that. Okay, so what is the Big Garden Bird Watch? Well, it's an annual event that's organised by the RSPB, who obviously we work quite closely with, in partnership with. It's now in its 44th year of operation. So it started in 1979, and it's probably the largest citizen science project in the UK. During the time that it's been operating, over those 44 years, more than 137 million birds have been counted across the country. And those avid bird watchers out there who take part have spent more than 9 million hours recording the birds that they've seen in their gardens. So why is the Big Garden Bird Watch so important? Well, I guess probably primarily it's fun. But it's a great way also to kind of enjoy bird watching in a kind of warm environment, particularly in these cold winter months. But beyond that, it provides some vital information for the RSPB, really. Since the Big Garden Bird Watch launched in 1979, the numbers of many kind of common bird species have been in severe decline. Studies like the Big Garden Bird Watch offer the opportunity to find out why those species are struggling, and can also help provide clues as to why that is, and what we can do really to try and stem that decline and turn it around. It also supplies conservationists with data that traces why some birds are doing fairly well while others are struggling. For instance, species such as house sparrow, song thrush, and starling have all kind of really suffered dramatic declines over the last few decades, while other species such as collared doves, wood pigeons, who everybody sees all over the place, and smaller species like coal tit have done fairly well. And of course, it's not always just about looking for bird species, but as a result of the kind of people spending time looking out for wildlife, it also gives us some important indications about what's happening with other species. So some common species that were also found while people were surveying include foxes, hedgehogs, and even red squirrels. And some of the information that's come out through the Big Garden Bird Watch with regard to red squirrels confirms what we kind of know about the distribution. So in kind of England, really, only 6% of people have recorded seeing red squirrels, whereas up in Scotland, which is one of the hotspots, it's more like 37%. In addition, the kind of the Big Garden Bird Watch is a great activity for children to take part in, and it's a real kind of family affair. It's a good way to introduce them to garden wildlife, and it helps them build their species identification skills. But it's also an excellent way to give them an opportunity to get involved in a citizen science project. So let's have a look at some of the results from last year's survey. And in 2022, almost 700,000 people rather, sorry, across the UK took part, counting more than 11 million birds. Of those species that were looked at, house sparrow remained at the top of the rankings as the most commonly seen bird, with 1.7 recorded sightings throughout the weekend. Other common species, including blue-tip and starling, remained in positions 2 and 3 respectively. But one of the big surprises was that jay moved up 9 places to number 23, and that's an increase of 73% compared to the numbers that were encountered in 2021. This is it's a species from the crow family. It's very similar in size to kind of the magpie, and they're often seen collecting acorns, which they hide to use to try and get themselves through the winter. An interesting fact, an individual jay can store around 8,000 acorns each year, many of which remain buried and actually turn into oak trees later on. The results also indicate a small increase for greenfinch numbers compared to 2021. Greenfinch have been under, they've declined dramatically over the last few years, largely due to the outbreak of disease. Their population has crashed something like 62% since 1993. And that's led to them being placed onto the red list for bird species last year. The infection that affects them is spread by contaminated food sources, really, and by birds feeding one another on regurgitated food. And one of the kind of messages that comes out of that is it's really important for garden owners and those who feed birds to make sure that the bird tables are cleaned regularly and that the feeders are kept clean and all the kind of droppings and that sort of thing are cleared away. So among the findings, there are obviously a number of common species, which I kind of call the usual suspects that we find commonly. And this is where the quiz comes in. So from the top corner, anybody want to have a stab at what that one is? Fairly easy.
Blackbird.
It is a blackbird, yeah. And that was number 5 in 2022. Little one next to it, anybody?
Blue tip.
It is blue tip, yeah. And like we said, that one came in at number 2. Little brown guy next to him.
Sparrow.
Anybody know which one?
Hedge sparrow.
It's a house sparrow.
Oh.
Passer domesticus.
That's the one. Yeah. And again, that's at number 1 in 2022. All right, big guy down in the bottom corner there. Who's going to have that one?
Pigeon.
Wood pigeon. Yeah, yeah. See them all over the place. Usually crashing into my window at 9 o'clock in the morning. And finally, this guy with the red face.
Goldfinch.
It is, yes, and that was number 7 in 2022. Then it also throws up some kind of unlikely birds which aren't commonly seen, and are really kind of, I guess, the highlights of the Big Garden Birdwatch survey data that comes through. Anybody want to have a stab at any of these? The first one. Any birders out there?
Black redstart.
It is black redstart, yes. So these guys they're kind of a rare garden visitor, really, and they're about the size of a robin, and they've adapted to live in the heart of industrial and kind of urban centres. So places like that, there's a stronghold in Birmingham and Manchester. Its name comes from the plumage of the male, which you can see there. So it's kind of mainly grey with and black in colour with a red tail. And one of the reasons why they are red listed species and listed on Schedule 1 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act is because at the moment there's only about 100 breeding pairs left in the UK. So they are kind of a real species of conservation concern. The next one's a difficult one. Don't know if nobody would get that one. It's not a native UK bird. It's called the dark-eyed junco. Now they are resident to temperate North America, and in the summer they kind of move north into the Arctic. However, they have come up on the Big Garden Bird Watch on one occasion, and it was an individual that spent a couple of days in a garden in the Scottish Borders in 2017. And at the point that that was seen, less than 50 had ever been recorded in the UK. Next one, anybody?
Purple heron.
It is a heron, yeah. It's the green heron, in fact. And this is it's a small species from Northern and Central America again. And in 2018, it was recorded in somebody's back garden in Pembrokeshire while they mowed their lawn, of all things. So again, something that's a little bit out there and unusual. So the one down in the bottom corner is kind of similar to some of the winter visitors that we get in this country at the moment. So it's kind of it always looks a bit like redwing and a cross between redwing and fieldfare, I think. But it's actually called the dusky thrush. And this species is strongly migratory and winters in the south to Southeast Asia, principally in countries like China and neighbouring nations. But rarely, it does rarely kind of cross into Western Europe as well. And in 2006, one was captured in a back garden in Derbyshire. And when news of that broke, this poor person ended up with about 600 twitches, I think, in their street, or were trying to kind of get a glimpse of it. The final one there, anybody know what that one is?
Turtle dove?
It is well, it's a variation, so it's an oriental turtle dove, that one. And that again has a wide kind of native distribution that ranges from Europe across to Asia and Japan. And in 2006, one was spotted in Kent from somebody's window, and they watched it for a few days from the window, just kind of plodding around in their back garden. So that gives you an idea of some of the more exciting things that you can come across, as well as the kind of usual suspects. So how can you get involved? You can sign up on the RSPB website to receive a free guide, which gives you kind of a really good background and some ID tips for some of the common species. And there is a link that will go into the chat for you to be able to sign up on the RSPB website. You choose one hour over the Big Garden Bird Watch weekend to carry out your survey, and you can do more than 1 hour as long as you choose a different location in that same weekend. You count the birds that land in your garden rather than just flying over. And the good thing about the Big Garden Bird Watch is you don't necessarily need to have a garden, but you can record those that land on your balcony, or you can go down to your local park and record the species that you see there. So it doesn't necessarily need to be that you're recording them in your garden itself. The other important thing is that you record the highest number of each bird species that you see at any one time, rather than the total number you see over that hour period. And then once you've collected all of your records during your visit, you submit your records online to the RSPB website. You can also submit them by post, but given that we are looking at sustainability webinars and all the rest of it, it's probably better not to use the paper if you can avoid it. So, the bird ID tips. I guess primarily, the best thing is to have a good bird ID book. Now, there's a bewildering choice out there, but a couple of that I kind of use are the Collins Bird Guide, and then the RSPB producer Pocket Guide to British Birds, both of which are really good. You want something basically that you can use quickly in the field. rather than kind of flicking around pages trying to find the species that you've got in front of you. Another good source is to watch bird identification videos, and there's a big resource on the BTO website for those, and they give you a really good kind of idea of some of the common species, and they also have videos that help you tell some of the species that are very similar to each other, how to tell them apart, and that's a really good resource. But there's also sources such as YouTube, which I've used in the field when I'm on a survey quite a bit, and there's lots of videos on there that you type in the species that you're looking for, and it will give you a video that tells you how to tell them apart or how to identify them. Download a good app. There's an app that I use called Merlin Bird ID. And again, there's a link that we can put into the chat for that one. But there's also others out there which I use. There's one called Bird Up. Now, that's a really good app because that allows you to record the sound of the bird that you're hearing. And it gives you, it will attempt to ID the bird species based upon what it's recorded. Sometimes it works well, particularly if it's quiet. If there's a bit of noise around you, the results can be a bit patchy, but it always gives you a good place to start looking. The next thing, before you take part in the Garden Bird Watch, is to try to do some homework. So once you've chosen a field guide, for instance, if you look through it regularly to familiarise yourself with the layout and where to find particular species, not only will that help you learn some of the identification pointers that guide contains, but it will also make it easier for you to find your way around the guide when you actually need to use it in anger and you've got something in front of you. It's also a good idea to give yourself a head start in trying to identify some of the species that you might find. Doing some basic research about the species that you're likely to find in your garden during that hour is always a good tip. And it will help you narrow down the list of likely suspects when you do find something which is a bit unfamiliar. Of course, the other thing is if you've done enough research, you might be able to recognise those birds straight off from the information that you've gathered from those guides. The other thing is to train your ears, because very often when you're looking for birds, you won't always see them, and quite often you'll only hear them. So there's a number of good apps out there which and websites which will help you to identify them, and there's some links again that we can put in there for those. The RSP website has its own bird song identifier, where you can look at species and you can play the songs that those species commonly will use. But there's also others. Xenocanto is an international kind of bird website that has a huge repository of calls and songs for species, which is always really helpful. The other thing that really helps is to come up with an easy way to remember birds that you've seen or that you've heard. And that's one of the common tricks that I will use when I'm out on surveys. So I'll look at a bird and try and think of something that it reminds me of, or likewise the call. This little guy here, for instance, this is a long-tailed tit. So when they're in flight, I always think they look like flying lollipops. They have the really long tail, which looks like the stick, and then a little round body that sits at the top of that. And I just kind of remember them by saying, yeah, that's the flying lollipop. Magpies, for instance, will have a call that sounds like, I always think it sounds like a machine gun. Just like that. And it's just a really quick, easy way for you to be able to remember what it is that you're listening to. And finally, the Big Garden Watch this year takes place between the 27th and the 29th of January. So that's this weekend. like I say, it's a case of choosing your location and then you pick an hour. It could be any time of day, because it gives it the more people that choose different times, obviously the more rounded picture you get of what species are around at what particular time. Your online records that you've collected, they need to be submitted to the link that's there, and again we can put that into the chat before the 19th of February. And if you have decided to do your records on paper, those results need to be submitted before the 14th of February. And that pretty much is it. I hope I haven't bored you all to tears like this little guy here. But if there are any questions, please fire away.
I don't think you were boring at all. I thought you did really well. It was very clear. You've had a particularly high interest rate in the chat, and a lot of people sharing links, documents, ideas, more than we've had before. So if people haven't had an eye on that, whether now or when it closes, make sure you have a look at that, because there's some great stuff in there. Well done, Paul.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Do we have any questions from the group, or well, you've got loads of thumbs up and applause, and I never get this. Jesus Christ, Paul, you can come and do my sessions. I'm only joking.
Oh, you're all very kind. Thank you.
Anything anyone would like to ask? You don't have to, obviously.
Be gentle.
Yeah, if I may, why the month of January versus other months of the year?
That's a good question, and I looked for this, looked for the reason on the RSPB website, and it kind of it mentions the fact that at this particular time of year is when birds need the resources more than any other time. So what you'll find is that more birds and a greater diversity of birds will be in your garden, looking for food resources and shelter and that sort of thing. And I think that's why they choose this particular period.
You also had a question around how to encourage birds into the garden, and I answered it for you, because I stalked the RSPB website before, and there's a whole page on there to do with signing up that says how to get them in the garden in the first place. So there's loads of stuff on there.
Yeah.
I did that, and I put some food out, and the little blighters still haven't come to say hello to me.
We have a bird table at home, and we you put out a range of different seeds and nuts and that sort of stuff, and that's how we attract the greatest the greatest amount of species, I think. Our neighbours will put out one type of food, and like you say, they don't get anything, but different species will take different food resources. So the more you provide to them, the more chance you've got of encouraging those into your garden. And I always think that once they find it and they start to pick up on it, word seems to spread, because once they begin to find food here, more and more species appeared as time went through, as by. It's a nice easy resource. It's a bit like McDonald's or something, I guess, if you're a blue tip.
Awesome. Okay, again, loads and loads of really good comments. It's obviously a topic close to people's hearts. There's loads of good stuff in there. So as always, we will download this, package it up, and then we will load it onto the Ground Control University YouTube channel. The link will get posted back in here. Last week, when we did that, we got about 80 people clicking on that to watch it who were not on the webinar. So that's a great result, because it's obviously being shared. Do the same thing again. Anyone take the link out of here and share it with your teams, and go, if you missed it, go watch it, because what you're doing there is spreading this sort of sustainability love around. And on Friday, you will see that I will then share the next invite for the next 4 sessions for all of your February sessions as well. One of which is we've got some external speakers from Octopus Energy, which Justine has arranged. So that'll be really nice to get a different voice that's not just us as well. So that's it. Other than that, thank you very much. Lovely to see you all, and we will put the link in as soon as possible. Oh, Amanda, you've got a quick question before we go. Oh, no, you haven't. You wait.
Sorry, no.
It was a fake hands up. It was to attract attention. She was doing a love heart. That's it. Right, cool. Enjoy the rest of your days, guys.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Thank
Paul.
you.
Bye.
Bye.